We're live.
We are live, this is Senate Finance. This is the 29th of February. We will not do this day again for quite a while. And we are continuing our discussion. We are trying to come to resolution. Will be here on 236. There it is. Okay, and our first witness is Greg Faber from the PUC. But I think we've got 236 wants us, wants us to take off the aesthetic requirement or ability for people who appeal on the aesthetic criteria. We've been told that if we do that, it's not in the requirements anyway, so it won't get done. We not, aesthetics would be included somewhere else in the process?
For the record, I'm Greg Faber with QC. Good afternoon, everybody.
Because I thought,
So it does both of those things.
okay,
It says not only can't you intervene on that criteria, it removes the criteria completely.
Okay.
In the next section.
right, okay, so I think there's some uneasiness about carte blanche, go wherever you want. But I think there's also a desire to help renewable energy be developed as quickly as possible. And we're trying to find a middle ground. The
Right.
middle ground that has been suggested is you require towns to have a designated space for utilities. That's, I think, cell towers go in there, does it? No.
There's no requirement for towns to do that. Towns can
Towns
designate an area
Okay,
and have that designation be approved by the Regional Planning Commission, and then it's official. Nothing for cell towers.
okay. I guess we were thinking that might be a compromise. If you were in one of those areas, then you could
Right.
build anything. But we're trying to find out if anything gets built in those areas and why or why not.
Mhm.
I think we started first with you, but we've got regional planning here,
Right.
just trying to get a sense of why, if that isn't a compromise, why isn't it? What, what do utilities, renewable energy? And I think we're thinking mostly of solar fields.
Mhm.
What do they require, and is there a way we could designate areas that might work?
Okay, so these areas can be designated by a town, and many towns have done that. So I tried to pull together some numbers, and there is a distinction here between section 248 and section 8010, which is the net metering section. So
Okay.
generally smaller solar
Your
projects.
things on your house are put to in my.
Yeah, rooftop, more residential scale, okay? So that's net metering, that goes up
Yeah.
to 500 kilowatts. And then above that is the megawatt size projects, that's considered under section 248. The bill, that's 236 as written, that only impacts section 248. So that's one inconsistency. So the smaller ones, it's not clear whether those would be impacted by removing the aesthetics from 248. And of course, 248 covers all the utility projects like substations, transmission lines, anything, any utility project, telephone stuff, anything.
Okay,
Right, so that 248 is pretty broad. Net metering is more narrow. It's only impacting residential size generation. It could include small wind, but typically 90% of that is solar.
right.
So that's one
But
inconsistency.
if we said aesthetics, we are having a neighborhood discussion with our utility because they want to put the lines underground, which would be digging it up. Only it looks like I could have 3 large boxes
Uh,
on the sidewalk between my house and the house next door, and there's some concern in the neighborhood about that.
right,
And that would also be included, so if they just decide to do that, and not ask us, then we couldn't say that's aesthetically ugly.
well, okay, so distribution lines are a
Yeah.
weird sort of thing.
Oh, so that's
We probably shouldn't
different.
talk
All
about
right, we won't
distribution
talk
line,
about that.
but,
But other,
transmission line, say there's a large transmission project coming through your property
yeah,
and you wanna intervene on aesthetics, that's gone.
Okay.
You could not do that.
okay, so this is more broad range.
So if you wanted to limit it to solar, you'd have to
Okay.
put language, you couldn't do that.
I'm a little more leery about allowing windmills.
It would apply to wind turbines as
Yes,
well.
I happen to think wind turbines are beautiful. But I know other people don't share that.
That's right.
Probably, I mean, they're beautiful when I'm looking at them on the mountain in front of me. Probably not if it were vibrating in my backyard.
Right, so I don't know what the purpose of this, the intent is, but if you wanted to limit it to large solar,
Okay,
you'd have to say that, and you'd have to carve out or include smaller net metering projects, because then you have a situation where if my neighbor was building a small solar project in their backyard, I could intervene under aesthetics on that.
Mhm.
But if someone was building a large solar project across the street, I couldn't intervene. It would be a strange situation.
okay,
to say
so
the
we should
least.
probably be consistent, I suppose, aesthetics on a small solar when it is
Right.
right in front of, yeah. I remember when we had some big satellite domes went up. I mean, when they were
Yeah.
15 feet across in people's yards, and there was some concern about that.
Right.
Probably not as important as renewable energy, but definitely.
Why is it that the neighbor
Could
would
intervene,
be, yeah, but.
because this bill is limited to section 248, whereas net metering is handled under a different section of Title 30. So it's not clear what the intent is and how it's, the way it's written though, it only affect the big ones. And it would be so broad as to impact all utility projects as well, such as substations and things.
Yeah.
Things of the, and wind turbines.
Is here, yeah.
Um,
We'll look on her calendar and see if she might be able to join us evening. I'm trying to get our drafter here.
Okay.
We're trying to see if she's free. If not, we'll get her in. Probably, we'll see if we can get her tomorrow when we're discussing this.
Okay.
It's free at like 4.
It's 4. We're gonna go till,
I mean, I guess maybe she's free right now, but we're not really free right now.
no. Okay, well, see if she can come in and join us tomorrow. Okay, because we need to be clear. If we're just doing the large solar. And we need to be clear for the wind in that. And we need to be clear, about if we're taking in, and I suppose it would be better to be consistent. If we're gonna take out aesthetics,
I think it would be. I mean,
okay,
just for confusion's sake among people, when they try to deal with our process. It would
Yeah.
Be very confusing for folks, I think.
so it either is or it isn't considered.
Well, yeah, I would think. I mean, well, you could say, look, it's only considered for the big ones.
Yeah,
But to say it's not considered for the big ones, but it is considered for the small ones?
is it considered for
weird.
the small ones now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. And
Yeah.
we probably have more neighbors upset if we took it off that.
Right. So for the larger ones, they could be located in a municipally designated area.
Right.
However, we don't have a checkbox for that. I tried to find some,
Okay,
but it's very difficult to find. You have to go into each case. And of course, 248 cases, it includes
oh, yeah,
hundreds of different things. And you have to look at the pre-filed testimony to see if it's in that municipally designated area. So I can't give you numbers on how many large projects are actually built in municipal area. What I can tell you though is that I've seen these municipal designations, they basically designate an area of the town.
Yeah.
It could be large, it could be small, based on the town. But you could be adjacent property owner to that parcel. And let's say someone wants to locate the solar field next to your property line as opposed to further out in the field.
Yeah,
You would have no recourse under our process to impact that, even if it was a municipally designated area. Maybe that's the intent.
okay, so if it would be possible to move things 50 feet up the hill, so it's out of, you would have no place to make that.
No, or say you wanted some screening, you wanted extra
Yeah,
screening
okay.
along your property line, let's say. Again, you would have to intervene under aesthetics, and that wouldn't be available to you as an adjoining property owner. So you're running into some of the same problems
Yeah.
I described before. It would just be a smaller subset because there's not that many municipally designated areas. And those areas may not be suitable for large solar.
Well, I'm
We
starting
don't
to
know.
think about three-phase power and how much of it there might be in small towns, if any.
Right, and you want to be close to a transmission
Yeah.
line. You want a cleared area, you don't want to have to do a lot of clearing.
So
Keep
another
costs
parameter.
down, yeah, so. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a smaller subset, but you have the same exact problem. People will have no recourse to get screening or to try to improve the project from their point of view.
Okay,
Yeah, so I don't know what else to say about it.
okay. Any questions? No questions. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for being patient with us.
Of course.
It's taking us a long time, Bill.
I'm happy to look at any changes to language and,
Okay.
like that.
Okay, hey, Peter Sterling.
Hi.
Hi,
I have my phone because I have to read something. Okay, I'm not getting here. Hi, Peter Sterling, Executive Director of Renewables Area Vermont. Thank you so much for taking time. It's really grateful that you all taking time to dig into this and try to get it done right. So that's wonderful. So before I go to my written spiel, I just want to say, like, at least from Rev's standpoint, no one is at Rev is trying to get rid of, none of our members, me, no one is trying to get rid of the aesthetics criteria. There's a role. Yeah, there is a
so the bill says.
no, well, this is what no, I just want to say as clear as I can. No, Peter Sterling as Rev's employee and Rev members that I speak to, none of us feel that we should eliminate aesthetics criteria in citing of renewable energy projects. We've never said that on the record. We've never advocated for that. We feel as currently written, the aesthetics criteria is being misapplied at times and it's hampering development of renewables. There's a way to make a reasonable change that protects the PUCs, protects the public interest right to have projects curtailed based on aesthetics. But no one has talked about it being eliminated. So that seems, just want that to be clarified. This bill, the only change, as I read this bill, and as it's been described to me by the intent by Senator Watson in this bill, the only change it's trying to make now is that landowners cannot participate on the aesthetics criteria. They can participate in the process with other criteria. But everyone else, including the Department of Public Service, towns, regional planning commissions, and the Public Utility Commission, can continue to raise aesthetics as part of the citing of renewables. The only one, my read of this bill, again, other lawyers may it differently. The only change this bill is making is that landowners would not be able to participate in an appeal in the process based on aesthetics criteria. Everyone else will be able to continue to do so. And to Mr. Farber's point about the confusion between doing this and say this bill intends to do through section 248, which is the larger projects. Net metering is a different set of rules. I have not heard from my members that citing smaller net metering projects the aesthetics issue is a big problem. They've not raised that. I mean, if you want to include that, that's up to you. But for rep members, what we've continually heard is citing the larger project through section 248, the aesthetics criteria is being abused by adjoining landowners to delay obviously and all that stuff that you've heard.
Right,
So
so the real problem is landowners, when they intervene on aesthetics, because it's really the only door they have.
it's one of the.
Traffic and public
Yeah.
health, I think, are the other two, which
Right.
are not.
Right.
There really isn't a whole lot of traffic within solar array once it's done.
Most times.
But they, because that gives them a foot in the door, they slow down the process, and if you're building,
Yeah.
time is money.
Right. And,
Okay.
and again, this is, what you've heard this not only from myself in my previous testimony, but Tom Garden and Jocelyn Wilczek and Ben Marks. Well, less from Ben, but mostly Tom and Jocelyn and myself, is that when someone said, a landowner reaches out or gets in contact with a solar developer and says, I want to put some solar on my property, a bigger project. And the developer shows up and just looks at the site, and maybe close to three-phase power, or close to a road, for a substation that works, and they see a neighbor across the street. And they're like, unless your neighbor loves this, we won't even bother investing the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 in the siting and all of that, because that person can stop it and will never win. So it stops projects from even being considered, and that's part of the chilling effect that the misapplication of the aesthetics criteria has had. So let me just say, yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to clear those couple points up. Is that clear as mud?
No,
You fit-
so other people, but not neighbors, essentially. I don't think people from down, 3 doors down complain, or
Right.
3 towns down, but neighbors could.
I'm just trying to understand the position that, at least what I'm hearing, is that the people who will be most affected by the aesthetic criteria are not allowed to intervene, but everybody else is. In terms of, the other agencies and so on and so forth, who have presumably less of an interest in or effect on them of the aesthetic criteria. And the one person who has the impact of aesthetics, which is typically the neighbor, would be cut out.
Well,
And I wonder about, is that fair?
okay, well, the way many of us view the process is you have a town plan, you have a regional planning commission, you have a public utility commission, you have a Department of Public Service, professionals, the PUC and the department, whose job it is to look at this aesthetics criteria, standing where the neighbor is standing, and then weigh that versus all the other public benefits of this project. And because what we have now, what we have now is the pendulum has swung so far in the direction where like in Ben Marks's case, right, the fellow from Acorn in Shoreham, he had a community solar project. It was located on a preferred site. The town had designated a preferred site. Aesthetics was brought up by an out-of-state landowner whose property was vacant.
Right.
And so, it has swung to a situation where something like that can stop or delay and obviously at the end of the day, make a lot more expensive, a solar project.
Have
So
any of these
it's-
other organizations raised an objection to aesthetics on any projects that you're aware of?
yeah, you're right, the PUC, the Department of Public Service numerous times
Mhm.
has said, we do not agree with a certain solar project because we believe its aesthetic impact is undue. They fly the Queechy test. I mean, that's happened numerous times, and there's times the Department of Public Service has said, we think the aesthetics impact is not significant.
Have they raised them at the same time or separate from an abutting landowner? Or are they simply complementing what the abutting landowner has raised?
No, it's independent. They have the Department of Public Service will hire its own independent aesthetics expert for, the bigger projects. Professional whose job it is to interpret the test and make their own independent assertion. And then the department gives that recommendation to the PC, who then again
Mhm.
can make their own decision through a site visit.
Mhm.
And that's what actually happened in the case we talked about in Manchester, where the
Mhm.
department hired an aesthetics expert. The department's aesthetics expert said, this is a go.
Mhm.
PUC brought in their own team. PUC said, we think the aesthetic impact is undue and we are not going to permit this project. So,
The only time we've been told
The only
that
time.
that's happened.
I can't say much, I don't know, maybe
We've been told that,
okay,
I think was the one time in 25 years
Okay.
that aesthetics was the deciding criteria.
I'd actually have to research that.
Okay, I mean,
I'm
that,
not saying that
we
person.
don't have our own research either, we just.
Yeah,
have
yeah,
this.
yeah, but I can't, I haven't confirmed, I haven't actually researched that, so, when the guidance I was given, or the frame I was given to come in today was talking a little about what does it mean for a town plan to designate a piece of
Well,
property.
yeah, we're looking.
Yeah.
For, we're looking for compromise
Sure.
here.
Yeah,
And we have designated areas. My sense, and I was hoping you could tell us,
yeah.
is how many projects go in those areas? And if they don't, why don't they? What
Okay.
do what do the companies need
Right.
to make a designated area viable for them?
I can, have my person try to go through the EPUC,
Okay.
answer specifically, how many projects go in a designated area? Okay, well, let me just,
PUC says they don't have it because there's no box, they'd have to go
but we could,
back. And do
probably,
records,
we
but
could-
You might know.
but my people may be able, like, I can call some people,
Yeah.
find a list of projects, then call my people, you did the
Yeah.
site plan. Let me just say, a town plan is a guidance document, right? When you make preferred sites, it's a guidance document intended to promote orderly development. It's not enforceable by law. So, town plan designation for a site doesn't change anything as far as, what may happen. And in fact, even, really clear out the room. Even if, a town energy plan did designate something as a preferred site, it still might not be adequate. It might not, the town may not have been able to consider all the factors required to make a solar project viable, such as whether there's, the wetlands are still there, distance to phase 3 power, the owner's willingness to sell, whether it would bump into single plant issues, 2 plants being too close, solar arrays being too close together to meet net metering requirements. So even if it's been designated as a preferred site, it still might not be, this is what my developers tell me, might not be right.
I'm starting to gather that 3-phase power might be the deciding issue.
It's certainly not, I wouldn't say there's one that's
But it
decided,
is,
but it's a
it
big one.
is a cost.
Oh, yeah.
It is a big cost
Yeah,
to
yeah.
stream. So
Yes.
it would be best if you were along Route
Yes.
7 where there's.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
if you can, well, and as the grid gets upgraded over time, we'll have more and more access to 3-phase
Mm-hmm.
power. And so that'll be helpful. The other thing is, once that plan is written, development activities and other activities happen which are more dynamic than these town plans, like the PUC changes some net metering rules, like they just changed some of the forest clearing rules in 5.100, which may now put some sites that are preferred sites off limits. When a town wrote their plan, they had the best information in front of them, and rules change. And also, a big one is what you just mentioned, Senator, is utility circuits, capacity and feasibility, that changes over time. Some circuits become overloaded. When the town wrote their plan, that circuit could take a ton of solar, and now it can't. And doesn't mean that people who wrote the town plan were wrong or did anything bad, it's just things are dynamic. And it doesn't mean if somebody was designated preferred site a year or two ago, it's still a preferred site. And so that I don't know if that's not the compromise I think we can, that would make a meaningful difference. But again, I just really want to be clear for the community, and I hate to beat this dead horse, but the intent of this bill is not to eliminate the use of evaluation of aesthetics in the setting of solar. That's not Senator Watson's intention, that's not
okay.
how it's describing, that's certainly not something we would support. There should be a role for aesthetics in the setting of solar, there has to be. We want Vermont to be Vermont. However, we have a situation where the pendulum swung so far that even just the potential opposition from the landowner stops the project before it can start. And there has to, and that's most of the time it's based on aesthetics. The threat of confrontation over aesthetics criteria. And so that's what we were hoping to mitigate in this bill through the larger projects, the Section 248 projects.
Okay,
Would a potential way of compromise be something in the bill that would set up a process whereby a landowner of an abutting property could petition or could write or what have you, one of the agencies such as the PUC, who has the ability to ask that they impose an examination of that criteria.
That could be interesting. I'd love to see language on that. That could be a more formal process and
We're gonna get,
Mhm.
I don't think it's the PUC, the Public Service Department is
Yeah.
charged with
Right.
representing the
Mhm.
public.
right, correct.
And we
That-
could beef that
Yeah.
up so that the landowner could
Yeah.
appeal through them. That might, because yeah, I don't know how familiar, they make site visits to every time there's a sighting. I doubt it.
And you know, I'm no expert on Act 250 by a long stretch, but you know, had this been described to me by people who were like in both fields. The process for a landowner, adjoining landowner to appeal and in aesthetics, the Act 250 is a lot more strenuous and onerous than it is to do a solar array or a removal process. As far as having to prove, you know, burden of proof, right? The PUC takes their process and, you know, you comment on something me where it's much, landowners just have to say they want to appeal and they can be part of this process. Where Act 250, you have to fill out forms, you have to prove that you're gonna be affected in a much more serious way than in section 248. Again, that pendulum had just swung too far in the wrong direction.
Sandra,
Thank
Oh, the
you.
expert on Act 250 is gonna
Well-
talk. Am I in trouble now?
No, I am not an expert. It's many years since I was directly involved, but, and as an analogy, in Act 250 to get a party status, because party status, you need party status to be. So your concern is with the positive field,
Yeah.
okay? With, to get party status, you have to establish to the commission's satisfaction that you have a particularized
Yes, that's right.
interest,
Right.
which I think would is inconsistent with the argument that, well, you have these other agencies. Because the other agencies are looking at the broadly viewed public interest. The whole idea of a party status, this
Yeah.
affects me.
That's right.
I was not aware that there were different between section 248.
Yeah.
In terms,
Yeah.
but I would say this, I know having chaired a district commission, Act 250 commission, we were pretty careful about granting party status.
Right.
We didn't just willy-nilly, I mean, that's what you hear, all that,
That's right.
anyone can intervene, no, it's simply not true.
That's not true.
We were very, because we're affecting people's property rights, we're affecting their investments. And we don't want to be overturned on appeal, and so we were pretty strict about who gets party status. Now, are you saying that's not the case here?
That's right. Based on the folks that I've talked to that have advised me on this testimony, who were, again, have a leg in both section 248 and Act 250. Right, and but one of them who also served on Act 250 commission, you know, it is much more difficult to get party status in Act 250. You have to really make, you know, the burden of proof is significantly higher than it is in section 248 because of recent changes by the PUC. And that's why the intent of this legislation is to push back on, you know, to move it more centered some of those changes by the Public Utility Commission.
Well, I'd be curious to know the PUC's reasoning on that.
I'm changing.
Yeah, I mean, as to why the difference.
Mr. Faber, can you answer what?
The difference between a section the PUC review and an Act 250
Yeah,
review.
yeah, I mean, in terms of who gets party status.
You have to have a particularized interest and you have to show that no other agency is going to represent that interest before in the case, before the PUC.
So that
it's basically
particular
the
thing is the same as.
It's the same. It is exactly the same.
So if you're putting a solar array in my backyard and I would like a cedar hedge,
Right.
that's my particular.
You're gonna argue the aesthetic impact on your property and no one's gonna properly represent that. The Department of Public Service, they're representing all ratepayers.
Mhm.
They're not representing you particularly. You have a particularized interest in that view or that screen.
Okay, so the guy across town who doesn't see.
He has more of a general interest.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't want to see solar in his town.
But they don't get it.
They probably would not, no.
Okay, so.
So what I'd like to ask, if I could, I didn't come prepared to speak to this particular section about the recent piece of changes to that streamline the ability of people to become involved. And I don't want to speak out of turn, so I'm gonna write something up because I don't exactly see it the way Mr. Farber's describing
Okay, and
it,
you
so
can-
I would prepare something in writing
Yeah.
that will
It
clarify.
would
those.
be,
I feel.
well, we're gonna keep trying to get these bills out of here. We've got 1 week left.
Yeah, I understand.
So, and I'm anticipating a bunch of Senate bills to show up here.
Okay, I can
But
do that really
we're
quickly.
trying to find,
Thank you.
we're gonna get the public service department in
Okay,
to talk about their role and what they do and who they represent. And maybe we go to a
Yeah.
more beefed up public service representation.
yeah,
Um, we will see.
Great. thank you. And
Thank you.
appreciate your questions. Thank you all. Have a great day. Thank you.
Okay. Christian Meyer.
Thank you.
I think we got this in the wrong order. But
Here. Sorry.
Is that your computer?
Oh, God, thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate that. Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Christian Meyer, Director with the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. This is my colleague Sam Lash, planner with our RBC and our energy planner. I don't know what the best format is. It seems like jump right into the question.
yeah, we're trying to figure out. Is there a way to do designated sites? Do you know if any town's designated site has had anything built on it? I think there's some reluctance, if I'm looking at the committee, to just wipe out a neighbor who's being directly affected from having a say in the process. But I think there's also a recognition that we don't want to slow the process down and make it so expensive that it doesn't happen, so.
Sure. So I can speak a little to our experience here in Central Vermont, which is Washington County plus 3 towns: Orange County, this town of Orange, town of Washington, and Orange Town. We don't map designated locations for renewable energy generation. And none of our municipalities have mapped designated locations, but what we do is designate types of locations. And that is generally follows state's guidance, so you're probably familiar with brownfields, capital landfills, gravel pits, those locations. We do see change in that area among our municipalities with additional criteria. Interested in bringing in additional criteria to give priority to certain locations, such as proximity to density, proximity to use, proximity to other community facilities or even farms. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Where municipalities have worked with developers and got involved in projects, and we are seeing more interest from the municipalities and programs like the Municipal Energy Resilience Program and the IRA came about. Those projects have gone into those types of priority locations, like gravel pits, for example, in Duxbury. Does that begin to answer your question?
Yeah, when you locate types of properties. And I guess we have to have a gravel pit that's not in use. Other than that's a piece of land that's being chopped up quite a bit and not used to, nobody else can use it, nobody else can use a brownfield without great expense. Do you look at anything like the availability of three-phase power to that site, roads? You do, okay.
Yeah, and I should have also stated as part of, yes, we have these sort of very limited preferred locations.
Yeah,
Most of our work is about identifying constraints and possible constraints. And then those areas that where constraints are not located would be called our prime locations, along with rooftops. And there's other areas, because,
right.
we do look at we do consider things like three-phase power when we do a priority siting letter for the PPC. Absolutely.
So you've got areas, you've done some siding work. Do the utilities ever come to you and say, we'd like to put a solar array here? Do they come to you and ask where would be a good place?
That's that's a process we're trying to develop. Short answer is no. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say thus far, not for a specific project, but we've more recently been working with our distribution utilities and their planning processes and in ours. So we contact them for data around what their constraints are in terms of their infrastructure. So, where their substations, that capacity, right, for taking on additional projects, that kind of thing, so that we can integrate it into our regional planning and our towns can integrate it into their town planning. But then vice versa, we've begun to be approached by the distribution utilities to also be involved in their own IRP, so their integrated resource planning processes about and integrate some of our layers. So we produce map layers that are potential. They show the potential. So they say there is no known possible, or there's no known constraint, or there are one or more possible constraints across your whole town. And then you minus that out and you have, here is your base or your prime for solar or for wind, right? And that's just the potential. So those are the maps you've probably seen that have colors, that show like, there's your prime or your base solar. That doesn't mean that the town has designated that area
Right.
for those technologies. It just means that that's the area in the town that's not currently constrained either by state, regional, or local plans.
Okay. So those would be much easier, I assume. Do the neighbors know you're designating the field behind them as a prime site?
That's part of the local planning process and the regional planning process,
Okay.
and there's a public outreach process and engagement part of that, but were you aware of the last time your regional plan was updated? It's,
No, and I was on the board.
Yeah, I just want to say it's not a prime, it's not designated as a prime site. The maps are very clearly, these are your potential area of your resources. And so I just want to be very clear
Yeah.
around the
But
language
even
there.
if you knew it was a potential site, you probably, most people probably wouldn't know unless somebody said, they're designating your field out there, you might want to go to the meeting. Because most people don't pay attention. So that wouldn't stop the neighbor.
Good afternoon. So when we passed Act 174, I think maybe 7 years ago, something like that, there was something like 500,000 went out to RPCs plus VLCT plus the department to help towns do energy planning, to be part of, to help with they meet its overall goal, but to kind of like choose your own adventure version, municipality by municipality. And the work product in the end was going to be that you would have a validated element in your certified town plan. So I don't know if you worked on that and if that happened, and well, I'll pause there, then I have a follow-up question.
just quickly, let me give you the stats for Central Vermont. We have 7 municipalities out of 23 who have enhanced energy plans.
Mhm.
We have 1 municipality with a climate plan. We have 5 municipalities working to enact enhanced energy plans. And then we have 5 other municipalities that are stalled out somewhere in the process. That doesn't fully encompass this story because, as you know, there's an energy element of a municipal plan, which is required. And then there's the enhanced energy plan with RPC approval that is voluntary. So there are municipalities with this information in their energy element that hasn't necessarily gone to approval at the RPC level yet. We are in the process of rewriting our regional enhanced energy plan, updating the data analyses, and as part of that, we'll distribute that information to our municipalities and try to urge more of them to kind of use this time as an opportunity to enact those enhanced energy plans.
Okay, and so how many have gone out all the way to and certified enhanced energy plan?
In our region 7,
Got it, okay. So at the time, we had a very angry meeting in room 11 with towns, I think 96 towns signed a petition saying that the PUC and the state wasn't paying any attention to their wishes around energy development. So this was the upshot of that, like, if you'll make your own plan, when you go before the PUC, you'll be granted substantial deference rather than due consideration, which towns at that time felt like wasn't enough. They wanted something more like substantial deference. So I don't know if, and the designated areas, the goal was that developers could see those as sort of prime zones, so that we get to the point of not just saying no to people, but steering that energy towards, steering the development towards those locations. And I don't know if that we end up imagining how things might work. We check in, but I don't know if it feels that way to you in the real world.
well, I think probably gets thrown around a lot, but I think COVID was a major stumbling block. You know, voluntary committees were on track to get this process underway, kind of front off course. Sam works closely with our municipal energy committees and planning commissions, depending on who's doing the work, to help them get back to where they want to go. And as I said, I think the trend is towards more and more that I'd say most of our municipalities will have enhanced energy plans in 20 years.
Okay, it sounds like towns, regional planning is doing a lot of work to do designated areas. It sounds like the energy company, renewable energy companies are not latching on to that. And that's what I hoped. I'm sorry, Peter Sterling left, because I think that's what you'd like to know. Are we putting you through all this work and it's not having the desired outcome, and then why? Especially if you're doing 3-phase power and, you know, those other considerations in your prime locations, why aren't they there? Are they big enough for a large development, or would they all go under the smaller net metering?
So I would say that not all of the so the areas are just taking those known and possible constraints out, plus adding, you know, in the regional and local constraints. And we're definitely moving towards then helping towns also identify additional criteria, or actually we already have worked with them to identify additional criteria for preferred siting. Usually that's like type and type scale. Like project scale is really important to our communities, and that's where we're getting into a bit of an issue here as well. It's important maybe to know that for Central Vermont, the vast majority of our projects are in those net metering programs. So we only have about 23 projects that are larger than 500.
So that's
still a lot.
Yeah,
So
we're looking for the larger 248 projects. And I have a feeling towns are not designating the size of a cornfield you need to put,
Yeah,
that's a lot harder
Yeah,
to
we don't have-
designate.
designated locations per se. We just have these base and prime, which is the absence of a constraint, or is going to be like that brown field or whatever.
Well, I was hoping Peter was going to find out why his people don't locate there. It may well be size, because I'm pretty sure it would be hard to get the city of Montpelier to designate Sabins pasture as a. It's also a prime housing site and a lot of others, but you need acres to put it in. Okay.
So for the towns that did go all the way through to an enhanced energy element, do you know, I didn't send this question to you ahead of time, but do you happen to know what kind of developments happened in those towns in terms of using those areas? Has it served the purpose of, I just imagine it ending sort of the siting wars. Finally, people would know where they were gonna be welcome and where they were gonna be less welcome.
So Duxbury is one of our most recent projects, so that was a municipally led project. I would say our larger projects, like in Berrytown, for example, Berrytown was one of the first towns to do an enhanced energy plan, for example. Those are, because of the size, are gonna be on large greenfields, which are not gonna typically be the preferred site type of our towns. So again, from the municipal perspective, we do, you know, the towns of, the projects, the types of projects that folks generally want to see are ones that have a direct community benefit to them and integrate into
So
their
this is community
existing.
solar, you sell it to the school at a lower rate and then the rest, okay. All right,
And
and
then
yes,
have the ratepayers backfill.
yeah,
Well, or, you know, with the new, you know, direct pay funding
Yeah.
option,
Yeah.
municipalities could own them too. We do have quite a few projects that are in the works.
So-
So 500 KW and less generally.
Yeah, and we
3
can
acre
provide
club.
that to people. If you'd like.
okay, so what we're being asked is for the larger projects, the ones that take acres. Okay, so,
Follow-up question, I know you probably wanna move on, but
no, the tax commissioner is here because we invited him to talk about the housing bill, things that might not be. And then we can get Ellen at 3:30,
Not confirmed that.
not confirmed, but, I'd like to have a discussion about this bill. Let's see if we can get it closer to resolution.
so on the compromise and the new question I have, and I don't know if you all can answer this, so I'll say maybe it's some further testimony. If we went down the path where for communities with town plans designating areas that did this, to not allow the aesthetics criteria to get party status. Do we know if the towns would want that? Like, do you have a sense, do the towns, would they support and appreciate removing that, because then maybe VLCT might want to chime in if we're gonna go down that path.
I'm thinking that if you were putting 10 acres of solar field on a hill in a town, they would probably like, and they do have a voice, and according to Peter, I guess they could still appeal on aesthetics.
The town could.
The town
Do they
could.
want us to remove it for others to use aesthetics in this process? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm wondering whether the town can appeal if they have to have a particularized interest, not a general municipal interest.
I'm just gonna say, maybe towns are like, no, we want our residents to be able to have this aesthetics appeal. For reasons unstated so far.
I'm pretty sure they would, and I'm pretty sure the towns would. Because if it weren't an issue, the solar developers wouldn't be in asking to have it, they're asking to have it limited to just individual people. Not the towns, and Greg, do you know, do the towns have to have a particularized interest? Can they intervene and say it's just ugly and it's taking up our whole hillside and,
Well, towns can intervene on anything.
okay,
Typically, they intervene under orderly development. They'll say that they'll cite their town plan and say, hey, our town plan protects scenic beauty. This is a scenic area designated in the town plan. Therefore, we oppose the location of the project. So it gets at aesthetics, but they don't necessarily have to intervene on aesthetics.
okay. But,
Towns typically intervene under orderly development,
okay,
different criteria, but
but they can, okay, so. All right. Sam.
The first big project that I knew of was on down around Boylston. That most folks could view as they drove by Interstate 89. Around exit 5 in Williamstown.
No.
One was developed by Mr. Garden, who was
Yes,
in
yeah.
here a while ago. And the one in Williamstown is actually larger, more space than the one in South Boylston, but it was located in a place that was kind of up on a little plateau, and the neighbors didn't object to it, and it didn't stick out like a sore thumb, and it was developed.
Yeah.
And the other one in Williamstown is over on the east side of town, I want to say Thigas Centers. property, but
Right, exactly.
it's,
Right, yeah.
it's, similar in size. I don't know whether it's bigger. And you can see it from quite some distance, and that was approved a half a dozen years ago. The garden, not garden one was probably 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, I remember.
And there were some others that on the west side of town that were someone who bought a plot of land and maybe a hayfield surrounded by trees and they put the solar panels in the hayfield and the trees are still there. And I never, I remember any controversy over that one.
Before, I wasn't around for those.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was one proposed up by exit 6 up at the end of the South Barry.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And there was a racetrack proposed up there couple decades ago.
Because that was before my time too.
And they took a NASCAR track and it was attractive because there was an exit right there and
You didn't have to
you
climb up
didn't have
Warren
to
Hill.
drive through small roads to get to it. And there had been talk about doing some solar up there, but I haven't heard anything come of it, even though a couple of small ones up that way.
And small ones are definitely easier to site. Yeah. Yeah, if you had to take up 5 acres up there, there'd be some concern, but that, it's how much of these, you're trying to find a compromise. We want to fight climate. We're committed to getting our emissions down. And so the more solar we can put up, the better. But I think most of us don't want to turn Vermont into someplace else. We want to protect the kind of natural beauty that people like to live here for. So we're working on those compromises. We've got them in housing, and trying to find a way to support us.
Full disclosure, I have 2 panels on my property behind my house, literally in the backyard. And before that, I had a 90-foot wind tower. Yeah, and in both cases, the neighbors were approached to see if they had any complaints before the permit was issued. The wind tower came down because it didn't provide enough electricity and was replaced with solar panels.
If you put solar panels on all your hay fields, you'd probably get a little more reaction.
Oh, well, one of them's in the hayfield and
Yeah,
I
but
got a dump when I wonder what the certain times of day when it's tilted
Okay.
flat, where you can get under it.
it's not the individual solar panels that we're having, it's the. I wish Peter were here to tell me how many acres, is it 5, 10? I mean, when you put in a 248,
Well, it depends on the size.
yeah,
But we're talking several acres,
Several
for a 248, you're talking megawatt size projects typically. Several acres.
several acres of land, and that's a little different.
I mean, of course, it varies, but yeah, the big ones are big.
Yeah,
What would the state's role be in getting, I hate the cliche, thinking outside the box, but the box we're thinking in now, getting outside that box and forgetting about big, massive solar arrays and getting it so that solar is ubiquitous in the state. In other words, every and has solar collectors on it. That abandoned, the old factories have solar collectors on the parking lots have solar, so we don't have to worry about
acres.
yeah. I mean, what,
Easy for new construction, it's just the existing stock that is
Yeah, I
challenging.
mean, it comes down to the bottom line, it's called money. It's more expensive to, it's much cheaper to generate electricity if you've got one big field and one big transmission line than it is to have 5 smaller ones with 5 lines going to the transmission line.
I'm not talking about transmission line.
No.
I'm going to the building below Well, no, in some cases, you're using parking lots, yeah, you know.
Yeah, but right now it's up to the individual homeowner to put the bill to put up the solar panel, which they may or may not live long enough to see a return on their investment. And, to do a state project, every home has a solar panel on it. I don't know, we could ask if that would produce enough electricity, so it would do my hot water and heat. And have enough to send off to take care of all the other electric.
Well, there are already financing plans that even if you die before you paid off the debt, it's still a good deal, which is that your monthly payment on the loan is equal to what is now your present electric bill.
And we can try.
And we should also look at,
45% of our state, we were told the other day, are on social security. People on social security tend to be debt averse.
yeah, but they're paying an electric bill.
Yeah,
Yeah, the debt, payment on the debt was the same as the electric bill. They're relieved of that electric bill.
we will work on that. It's affordability, and it's not just having most solar panels I know do hot water. Some of them you can do your whole house, but if you're not in electric, it's the transition cost. That's what we found with the Affordable Heat Act. It's not that it's cheaper, and it's only cheaper if we keep the cost of electricity down. It's the transition cost to an entirely new heating system. And that's where having money to do that helps. And we don't have any money this year. I've been told to keep repeating that from the people across the hall.
I'm sure I've made a personal pledge to do everything I can to live long enough to see the financial benefits.
I'm working on that too. Ellen will be here in 15 minutes. Okay, thank you. I don't know that we found our way out of the fire, but we're getting more information to build the ladder. Ellen is gonna be here to talk to us if we have any drafting ideas in about 15 minutes. But we invited the tax commissioner, Abby, welcome back.
Can I just clarify something before you move to the next?
Yes,
I
please.
apologize. So this is something that's come up a couple of times, and the bill S 236 is basically has two parts.
Yeah.
First part says no adjoining landowner or anyone else can intervene under anything but health and safety or traffic. Okay, so that keeps people from intervening under aesthetics. Okay, you can intervene under health, traffic and health, that's fine.
Nobody's gonna do that.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah.
So if the bill stopped there, it would do what Mr. Sterling is saying it does. However, this part, and this part is the part that gives us pause, and this is in section B5. And it says here that before we can issue a CPG to a project, we have to make a finding with respect to the project that it will not have an undue adverse effect on aesthetics, historic sites, air and water purity, natural environment, natural resources, public health and safety, and it goes on. But this draft crosses out the word aesthetics there. So we interpret that as it's not making a finding on aesthetics. So that does remove aesthetics from the equation in our view. I'm not sure what the argument is to the contrary that Mr. Sterling is citing, but this seems pretty clear to me. If you cross out the word aesthetics, we're going to interpret that as the legislature saying, don't consider that, consider all this other stuff, but not that.
Okay, so they're saying, no, it's only for private individuals that you don't.
Right, but this sort of says, well,
That's
it
not.
really says, we're taking it out of consideration.
Alright.
So you have to be clear on that. If you just did this first part, that's one thing. But the second part, I'm not sure that allows the department or anyone else to.
Okay, so we will make that clear.
We drafted 181.
Okay, I don't have Kirby on agenda. That's why I'm working blind here. Okay. So. Tax commissioner, we went over the housing bill yesterday.
Yeah.
There's almost no tax provisions, is there?
Whoa.
But I thought, I
There's
told
some
you,
good ones in there.
I told him I'd give you a chance to appeal to us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Good to see everybody. Good afternoon, Craig Olio, Tax Commissioner. I was realizing this is the first time I've been in this committee this year, so I'm happy to be back and I look forward to this
I
discussion.
think giving some of the tasks I've been asked to accomplish, you may have some problems.
I'm always happy to come over, Madam Chair, as you know. So-
We need money.
Yeah, so Commissioner Farrell from Housing and Community Development wanted to be here with me, but he's next door advocating on behalf of his budget, so that's important work as
important.
well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be talking today about some of the tax incentives in S311, the B Home Bill that passed out of Senate Economic Development. Appreciate that committee's work on this. I think it's in Senator Bray's committee now in Natural Resources, so just looking forward to,
Testimony, so
yeah.
when it comes here in a rush, probably the last day, we will be ready to get it out and pass across.
My goal is to make it very easy for you, Madam Chair, to restore the administration's tax incentives in that bill and pass it right on out of here.
I told you I'd give you equal footing.
I appreciate that. You know, as you know, you've heard directly from the governor and many in the administration, housing is a huge priority this year. I know it is for many folks in the legislature as well. Administration strategy is really to pursue a myriad of options, right? Regulatory reform with tax incentives, with direct investment, right? Finding all of the effective tools that we can, utilizing them together. There's a lot in S311, that B Home Bill, that go well beyond the scope of my expertise. And I know folks like Commissioner Winters and Commissioner Farrell and Commissioner Winters would both be happy to come and talk to the committee about all of those additional elements. Today, what I'm going to be focused on are those tax elements in there. I have a presentation that Abby's going to run for us, and I appreciate that, Abby. You can just start right on slide 2. I would just say at a high level, our philosophy when putting together these tax incentives were to try to make sure that we're providing a meaningful financial incentive on an individual basis to help drive behavior, create a meaningful cost reduction for building and growing where and how we want to, while also being very mindful about how aggregate expenditures can add up for tax expenditures and being thoughtful on that. And what I'm going to talk about are the two big proposals, tax incentive proposals in S311. I'm going to talk about what they are, what the rules are, why we think they'll work, what we think we might get out of it, and what they're going to cost. So to start, there's 2 of them, and I'm going to spend most of my time focused on the first one, which is the bigger of the 2.
I
Which is
don't
it.
think there's a lot of concern about the second.
Fair enough. Well, I'm going to spend most of my time on the first, so I think that will be useful for this committee. So the first is a property value freeze, right? So reducing property taxes by freezing the value of qualifying newly constructed or rehabilitated residential dwellings at their pre-improvement value for 5 years. I'm going to go through all of the rules of the program in this presentation. And the second is a property transfer tax exemption, right? So property transfer tax generally paid by the buyer on transfer of real property. And this is an exemption for buyers who are buying a blighted dwelling where they are going to restore it again for use as either a homestead or a long-term rental within 3 years of that purchase. So if we move to the next slide, the property value freeze. So what is it, right? Let's talk about it. So it's a 5-year value freeze on the education grant list value of eligible new residential construction and rehab. I will say that the 5-year freeze was the administration's proposal. It came out of economic development with 2 years. I'm hopeful that this committee will restore it to the 5. There is an option for towns to opt in to offer a freeze on the local grant list as well. By default, we're talking about education value only, and that is to make sure that towns are not harmed by this proposal unless they choose to vote and opt into it.
Why not? Why should the towns not be harmed when they're benefiting from these blighted properties being? I'm just wondering if maybe an easier path for this would be that these properties would not pay municipal taxes for 5 years. It's just a hard argument to make this year to not feed the ed fund. But why are we protecting the municipalities that are now going to have a a less blighted property that has individuals probably living there and generating more economic activity from a variety of different thoughts.
I'm not sure that decision alone is a deal breaker for the administration. If that's something that the committee is really eager in pursuing, I think we'd be open to that discussion.
Okay.
From my chair and just setting this up, right, we recognize that there can be very strong feelings about local control. I know municipalities are feeling pain for revenues as well. And so we wanted to focus on the fact, and you'll see later in the presentation, very similar, if not virtually identical, programs to what we're proposing here are already available under current law to municipalities. So in a way, they already have an opt-in for this. And so we were not necessarily looking to change that process. But again, if that's something that the committee is really eager to discuss, I think we'd be open to that part of the discussion.
I would like a legal opinion as to whether or not we have the power to do that.
I
Maybe
think
for
that's a great question.
unincorporated towns, but for towns with charters. And I'm personally not fond of tar and feathering.
How would this be tar and feathering?
I'm taking away the town's ability to raise money for their school taxes.
We be talking feather.
No, what I'm saying is
Maybe tar and feather.
to not, well, the ed fund is a separate conversation, but I heard the commissioner say that this doesn't address the town's tax, the municipal taxes.
Yeah, towns could opt in to have an equivalent freeze on these properties, but by default, it's the education value.
I was here when we took the property tax from the towns. It was their sole means of raising revenue. And when we took that for education, it was very hard fought and they did not want to give up. That's where the local option taxes came in and there was a lot of talks about tax sharing. Because we took away a portion of their ability to raise revenues. That's their main revenue source. If we then now went in and said, oh, and by the way, we're gonna take more of your revenue. It would not be popular, I guarantee.
A lot of things that are here are popular. But if we, okay, I maybe.
Remember tar and feathering on top of it.
But just for that one property, if they didn't pay municipal taxes.
Well, how about if they put up an entire development? For one blighted property, maybe, but you're in South Burlington, you could put up 100 homes. And there would be no increase in the value of the grand list for 5 years.
For new residential construction, rehabilitation.
Yeah, rebuild.
And I think the chair is highlighting the robustness of that debate.
Did you or did someone work on any cost projections, like?
Yep.
Imagine like how much, because there'll be a growing gap. As education costs continue to go up, we'll have that flat line on revenues out of.
That's all, yeah, that's all in here. We'll talk about
Okay.
that. Okay, moving to slide 4. Yeah, where are the rules? Yeah, so the freeze is only available for eligible properties, right? So let's talk about what those eligibility rules include. So there are restrictions on the use of the property. Properties must be used for owner occupied homesteads or long-term rentals. Non-residential properties, second homes, short-term rentals do not qualify. And that has to be, there's an application process where that has to be certified, proven, and then recertified on an annual basis, or the exemption is lost.
Okay, but if I'm a developer and I build 20 homes.
Yep.
Which are then bought as homesteads.
Yep.
And I'd have to require that in my buying, in
Well, at that
sales
point,
contract.
the next owner would be responsible for those taxes. So if that owner decided not to use it for an eligible use, they would lose that exemption and they would have to pay the.
Okay, but you've still got 20 residential properties.
Yep.
That are not paying taxes into the ed fund.
They have a frozen value for 5 years.
5 years. But how does that help? How does that incent the developer to do the development? Because he's gonna sell them.
Yep.
Unless we're giving him, well, I can sell it for $5,000 more because you're not gonna pay 5,000. I wish it were 5,000, more like $15,000 in property tax.
Yeah, so I think you've highlighted something. This can transfer if still used for eligible purposes after sale. I think for the folks who are gonna be building and selling, the incentive may be less useful than the ones who are gonna be building and perhaps renting. In our research with housing and community development, their estimates are about 70% of those who are doing the construction will then rent the properties out. So those folks who were the builders will have retained the incentive in that situation.
And they
In
require-
the sales situation, right, it might be able to be factored into the price or profitability of the sale, which might incentivize additional units to get constructed. Right, if the developer finds it profitable because they can make that sale at a slightly higher price because they know that incentive will be baked in. That might incentivize additional units that would not.
I was hoping they could sell it at slightly lower price, given the cost of housing.
I mean, you could do that too, right? It's, at that point, you're talking about a private agreement between buyer and seller, right? Not necessarily something the state has to get in, but they can transfer the incentive if the buyer is going to use the property for an LP
So I
use.
build 20 houses, I sell it to people who are gonna use it for second home tax. And the value of that house is at the value of the land, so almost zero.
No, so second homes does not fall.
No, no.
So-
I build 20 homes.
Yep.
I sell each home to a primary,
Okay,
all right, homestead family.
Yep.
That price, the taxes on that home
Yep.
paid for 5 years to the
Correct.
ed fund will be close to zero because there was nothing on that land
yep,
when the house was built.
correct. But if it helps build those 20 homes, isn't that a net win?
Do you want to talk about the ed fund this year?
That's in here as well. Let's keep going. So yeah, use restriction, there's location restrictions. The property must be in designated downtowns, village centers, neighborhood development areas, or federal new market tax credit areas.
There are federal new market tax credit.
Yeah, so I believe there's at least one in every county. They are designations set by the US Treasury. They generally are set in areas in Vermont that have historically high poverty or low population density. So there is, I would say they're concentrated in the Northeast Kingdom, but I believe there's at least one in every county in the state.
Okay, so these are more low income
Correct.
areas.
Yeah, high poverty areas, low, places that need some TLC and some revitalization. And there is a requirement for multifamily units to be mixed income, which means at least 20% of the housing units must be considered affordable. So there's an affordability element to
This is perpetual.
multifamily units. I believe that's the definition of mixed income. That might be a definition that I would seek housing experts help on, but I believe.
Perpetually
that's the case.
affordable means they have perpetually subsidized
Yeah.
rent, which usually means you have to have some kind of organization managing it, including disputes.
I'll confirm that. Moving to the next slide, more of what the rules are. This is a time limited program, right? So not only is it a 5-year freeze, the program itself sunsets in 2027 in the language in S 311. And that is again, to make sure that this is really an incentive that's available for a period of time to help jumpstart the housing development that we need to revitalize communities and make sure housing is more affordable. As I mentioned, the qualifying property owners have to apply initially with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and the freeze does not begin until it is in use as a primary residence or a long-term rental. So you can't claim the exemption and then not do what you said you were gonna do with the property later, because you have to be doing the thing with the property for the exemption to be. And then you have to certify that annually. And if you are ever out of compliance, and the tax department can look for homestead declarations and landlord certificates, you owe all of the taxes that were frozen, even if you qualified in prior years, and you owe interest on it.
So all right. How is this computed when you go to get your mortgage? Because when I've done mortgages, you have to have, usually now they require escrow for your property and your taxes. If there's no property taxes for 5 years, and you don't know what the taxes are gonna be after 5 years, because if we're taking money out of the ed fund, they're gonna be higher. How does the mortgage get computed?
Well, so we're looking at this like an exemption, like other exemptions that might exist on the grand list, right? So it should be factored into the escrow, and also the language does require
It's only
the
subject to
full,
5 years.
correct?
So I can afford the house without the property taxes. But 5 years from now, when the property taxes come in at $15,000, I might not be able to afford it.
That's possible, I suppose. If you are interested in having a longer value for each Madam Chair, we are open to that discussion as well.
I'm looking at the property tax and at the general fund right now, and there's places in this building where I'll get card and feathers if I take money out of either one of them. Senator Brown.
Okay, so it's sort of like, no matter where anyone stands on that issue at year 6, I can imagine this committee and a future legislature talking about a whole series of people who are gonna lose their homes or places are rental like this now. There'll be this spike, in cost. So I get what you're driving for, like reducing costs, but I have a feeling we're also sitting a bit of a sort of an uncliff in future all of a sudden a late page spike.
So
Accommodated.
look, I appreciate that concern. I think part of what we are thinking about here is making sure that we actually can get some additional units on and making costs lower in those areas for the types of units that we want to build. I'll also say these programs are active. They have been for decades in many localities around the country, right? So if that
Says our property taxes.
Sure, but many of these local communities that are doing these kind of, they often are called tax abatements around the country. That's an interesting term. I don't see it as an abatement, but most of them are paying their school taxes on a local level as well, right? So you're gonna have those same kind of issues as these programs expire. So it's just not, it's not a concern that I've seen as we've done the research on this, but I'm not blind to that possibility. I think the focus is really on making sure that costs are low enough. I think this committee and others have heard about how high costs are for developers that they cannot produce affordable units. And so if we can make a reduction on some of those costs, and there's some proof that some of these programs work around the country, we might be able to incentivize additional development and leverage private investment with.
If this was
reasonable-
state money, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But it's ed fund money, and in other states, the state tells schools, this is how much you're getting this year. The argument is over adequacy. What is an adequate amount for an education? We are the only ones where I believe where this will take it directly out of the education fund. It's not a state investment. You're not doing an income tax credit. You're doing a property tax credit. And in here, have you got any limit on the price of the housing?
No, we're open to that discussion.
Well, we're doing we put $500 million into low income housing. High income housing takes care of itself. What we aren't putting any investment in is middle income housing. Who are your workers, your doctors, your nurses, your teachers, and I don't want to give a tax exemption to somebody that builds 15 McMansions and sells them for $800,000.
I addressed that concern.
Okay, good.
Okay, if we move to the next slide, we'll have some examples, right? So, and these are, I would say that these are not specific properties in these specific localities. They are examples that have reasonable numbers based on what I've seen on the grand list. And then they're using the real tax rates in those towns. And again, this is focused only on the savings from the education grand list value. The town opted in to allow a local exemption, these residuals seem higher, but land purchased for $700,000 in Winooski that constructed a $2.5 million 39-unit commercial apartment complex would have an annual savings of just over $36,000, 5-year savings of $182,000. Land purchased for $500,000 in Barry, where they have a $6.5 million 79-unit apartment complex, annual savings just over $100,000, so 5-year just over $500,000. And then an example with a blighted property, a single family home, right, that was purchased for $100,000, restored to $275,000, you'd have annual savings of $1,400 and 5-year savings of $15,000, right? So I want to take those numbers and then look at the next slide about you know, will it work? Right? Do we have evidence that it works?
Okay,
And
I
I
have one
quick
question.
question
Sure.
on the Crossbury one. So how do we get, more like a 10x multiple in 5 years? What's going on that's unique about that one?
I bet you I did my math wrong. It should be 1,400 times 5. So
Okay,
apologies for that.
7,000. Okay.
Yep. Good note, good eye.
But who's saving, who is getting the savings here?
The owner.
The owner.
Yeah. So if we look around the country,
But to Senator McCormick's point, if it's the owner, but not necessarily the person that did the blighting property, how is this gonna motivate people to buy a property, fix it up, and then sell it on the market if they're not gonna get the benefit?
look, I do think as you look around the country at these programs, most of them are providing value in the larger apartment complex units where the builder is then renting it out.
Sure.
And single family homes and owner occupied homes are probably not as large of the pie. But you can imagine, right, somebody who purchases that blighted property wants to fix it up for their own family's use. Again, I think you could also imagine areas where it's gonna help loosen the market a little bit to make it more attractive to get that, to be able to make that sale. And you might get a developer to step in where they otherwise wouldn't, but I do acknowledge, I think that this program is really more focused on the larger scale, long-term rental complexes. I think that's where the most value for the proposal comes from. And I think that's the experience around the country with some of these programs.
And we've only got Ellen until 3:45, so I'm gonna let the commissioner finish this up. This is just the first presentation. We have a full extra week to get the home bill. Actually, we don't even have the home bill. But when it comes to us, I hope before the last day, because we will be prepared to knock it out.
That's not McCormick, he's in charge.
So, looking around the country, right, so we're aware of at least 12 states that have at least one jurisdiction within their state that uses this. In California, they do it in a lot of places. There's 2 studies that I was able to find, one commissioned by the city of Philadelphia. I believe they've had this program, I think it was first enacted in the 70s and then reformed in maybe 2000 or early 2000s. And they looked at it in 2018 to say, what should we do here? Should we do anything? And they looked at a variety of options. They today have a 10-year freeze, so more generous than what's getting proposed here, that scales down 10% each year. So it's 100%, then 90, 80, 70, all the way down to 0 over 10 years. And their study looked at a variety of different options, shortening it to 5, restricting it to more areas, repealing it entirely, restricting the value. They
What were
said
they trying to accomplish? What was the goal?
they were trying to determine if there was a better way to do it that had more long-term
No, I mean,
benefits.
What was the goal of the city of Philadelphia with putting this in
Oh, incentivizing development.
downtown?
I think that they have it in probably a broad area of Philadelphia, but yeah.
We
I-
actually have an in with the city of Philadelphia, so.
Sure.
We will have to ask how that went.
Yeah, there's a link to this study in my presentation that's on the committee's website, but the economic impact analysis they did said all alternatives, meaning alternatives to the status quo in their 10-year program, result in less revenue and fewer jobs in the long term compared to the existing program.
I was
City-
in Philadelphia about that time. It was extremely bleak downtown. I was right downtown.
Yeah.
It was pretty empty.
Yeah, so I mean, I think
It's never
this
been like that.
analysis showed some real value from this proposal. City of Cleveland, they have a similar program. They do it for like green certified properties, I think. And they had a study that said that the abatements, again, they call them tax abatements around the country, but it's the same
That's what
program,
it is.
were associated with substantial economic activity, providing 2.2 million, 7.7 million, and then 2.3 million per year. That's in 3 consecutive years to the city. And just, I want to make a note, right, because there was a debate in Senate Economic Development about what's the right number of years. Administration had proposed 5. It came out of that committee with 2. 5 in the administration's proposal is already among the shortest in the country for these programs. Most are 10 or 15 years, and then New Jersey goes all the way to 35. So we already thought that was a fairly conservative approach. I'm also aware of Dallas, their Department of Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization estimated 2.8 million investment would generate 25 million in activity. I don't have that study. I've asked the city of Dallas for it, and certainly we'll be able to speak to that in the future. I also would just note, on the next slide that about if we think this would work, it seems that in Vermont, we've had this discussion before and the legislature has believed that this will work. Because again, very similar programs to this, like tax stabilization agreements, blighted property restoration, they already exist at the municipal level. The challenge is they're underutilized because towns, while they have the legal authority to also freeze properties or forgive vacation taxes, they have to make that up. And so towns don't utilize this to the degree that I think they could, because the municipal taxes are usually a minority share of the total tax bill. And so, again, I think we've had a lot of these debates over the years about using incentives like this to get growth where and how we want it. Believe that it worked for locally voted exemptions. This is really just talking about having the state have some skin in the game as well.
It's the ed fund that's got skin in the game,
Understandable,
not the general fund.
understandable.
Okay.
So, look,
Okay.
oh, sorry.
Well, so I'm just thinking, what would probably help would be if there were numbers around, I get the heck, the concerns about the ed fund, I have them, but if a blighted property is generating nothing for the ed fund, then there's
Or open land.
there's a right or open land, and maybe there's a gain there, and some of the potential gains can be quantified by this. It might offset the concern that
I love that segue.
the ed fund would be loose.
I appreciate that, Senator. So if we move to the next slide, we talk about what could the impacts be, right? So generally speaking, again, talking about only the ed fund portion, not the municipal portion, you'd be talking about a cost savings, depending on the town, of 7 to 8% of construction costs from this incentive, right? So if you've got a normal supply curve and that results in 7 to 8% more units, it means you've got an additional 200 or so units coming online per year. That would translate to each dollar of public investment driving $12 to $13 of private investment. And you'd have new units coming online at a cost of a little over $80,000 of public funding per unit. And that's only the direct cost of this, right? You've also got tangential benefits. You've got demographic and workforce improvements. You've got reduced housing prices. You've got community revitalization. You've got the other tax revenues that new residents are bringing in. You've got an increase in construction related jobs in Vermont, and you've got an increase in surrounding property values. You probably got more. That's what I can think of right off the top of my head. But none of that's quantified in all of that. That's just talking about the new units that we think could be generated from a proposal like this. And, I'm open to an idea of a supply curve not being linear like that. Again, I would point to that Philadelphia study, which is linked in the presentation, where they had estimated that a full repeal of their program would result in significant slowdown of development. New York City's having a similar debate right now, where a similar proposal has expired in the city, and they're very concerned that development is coming.
Those are cities. We are a small rural state. We only have one urban area that even meets this federal standard for a city. And they're doing it within their city revenues. This is the state. This is a whole state, and that's very different.
Let's talk about the ed fund, because I know there's a lot of focus on that. So we go to the next slide. So this is consensus. Should have been the other version of the word foregone. I apologize for that. But foregone revenue estimates, these are consensus between tax and JFO. So for fiscal year 25, the estimate for this program is $1 million. That would represent a 0.38% over the current property tax estimate increase projection. So we are talking less than 0.5% of additional pressure for this program that, again, has some evidence around the country.
Looking at if we were looking at a 4% increase, that would be decimal dust. We're looking at an 18% increase in property taxes. And so 0.25%, and I'm more interested in the other end where it gets to be 16.2 million.
But if you're also getting 200 units a year for that, I mean, you're getting units
But
at
I
a much
can't-
lower for 5 years. And then you get
But
the
I'm
full
giving up
grant
$16
value.
million in the ed fund. I'm getting, well, in theory, I'll get housing. But at the rate the ed fund is going up, That's significant money.
I mean, I think all of us agree that one of the strategies for helping to fix long-term property tax pressure problems in the state is additional organic rentals growth. Right? We need more units, we need more of a tax base. So, you know, this,
More middle class housing units,
sure,
not upper class, and we are putting $500 million into affordable housing.
I think direct investment is part of the strategy, absolutely. We also have to incentivize, I think, the behavior where we want it, how we want it.
That's not easy. Okay.
I think this makes a lot of sense for apartment complexes. I'm hesitant on the flipping single residential. So I'm seeing the case to be made for the high-rise buildings for the owners that are gonna continue to rent it out to get more of that stock on the market. But I'm just concerned that we're gonna have less than the right motivations for the blighted individual properties.
I think that's fair. I think one of the ways that you could resolve that, there's two ways that I've seen jurisdictions help control for that. The first is to put a value cap, it's on the freeze itself, right? To say you can't get more of a benefit than this amount of money from this, but all properties could qualify. The other would be to put a value cap on the type, on the single family residence that could qualify. So no single family homes worth more than 350,000 equalized value or whatever. The administration, I think, is open to both of those ideas on single family residences, if that makes the idea more palatable for the committee. I hear that concern, and certainly not the administration's intent to have this be going to, you know, luxury homes or luxury improvements.
Or luxury apartments.
There's a moving to the next slide, there's a property transfer tax exemption as well that I spoke about. So this would exempt the buyer from tax for purchases of blighted properties, the buyer rehabs for primary residence or long-term rental within 3 years of purchase. They got to show that it happened, right? We'll look for a homestead declaration or a landlord certificate. This one's available statewide, not just in the designated areas, because it's great to help incentivize blighted rehab. That one doesn't have a sunset. Moving to the next slide to talk about impacts of that one, we estimate that depends on how much investment is needed to rehab a property, but assuming somewhere between cost savings of 1% to 3% of the investment needed for rehab, a commensurate increase in units would be approximately 10 per year. Consensus foregone revenue, got the right version of foregone on that slide, 400,000 with the joint fiscal office. So again, if estimate holds, you'd be talking about units coming online at 40,000. Your your private investment would be $3 to $4 for every dollar of public investment. That's lower because it's just the price to rehab, not the full construction price. That's why the per unit cost is lower, but the you don't get as much leverage. I want to be sensitive to time, Madam Chair. My last few slides are just trying to address some of the concerns that I have heard in economic development. I think I've heard here. So the next slide talks about the concern about too many cost pressures in the ed fund. I guess my response to that would be, right, the current estimate for property tax increase in the ed fund is $265 million. So the value freeze would represent, again, an increase of 0.38% over those current pressures. And we all just agreed, legislature and administration together, that we can do good policy still, even with those cost pressures. Because the legislature just passed and the governor just signed the bill that provided relief for flood victims to not have to pay their full property taxes for fiscal year 24. And that had an ed fund impact of $1.1 million. So, you know, it's possible to do good policy even when you have cost pressures. And I just want to flag too that again, the Senate Economic Development Committee shortened it from 5 to 2 years. It does nothing to change the fiscal year 25 or 26 estimates on the proposal. Heard a concern that this will hurt town revenues from a municipal tax standpoint. As we spoke about at the beginning, this is by default and fund only. It allows an option for towns to opt in, not a requirement. So towns would vote in an equivalent freeze. So I don't think there needs to be a concern there. Next slide has a concern we just spoke about, right? The concern that the freeze will result in rich people getting big property tax breaks, building luxury homes or luxury improvements. I would say, right, on the blighted rehab, there is a definition that requires the property to be fixing substandard or unsafe conditions, right? So it actually does need to be a blighted property. It also has minimum thresholds for investment. For the mixed use and multi-unit properties, it must be considered mixed income, so you need a portion of affordable units. And then, as I mentioned in response to both the chair and Senator Chittenden's comments, I think the administration is open to some kind of value cap on this, so that we're making sure that for single family homes, it's targeted in the right place. I've seen both versions of that in other states. Final two slides. So the first is concern that we should just take this money and do grants or other direct investment with it. Tax incentives don't provide the value that we're looking for. I think from the administration's perspective, it's a holistic look. Do direct investment, do regulatory reform, and do tax incentives. And tax incentives can be a valuable part of the equation because research is showing that for certain recipients, they have a stronger behavioral change than direct investment. And it has to do with the philosophical or the psychological element of loss aversion, where people feel loss more than they feel gain. So if you give somebody a tax incentive, that undoes the stronger feeling of loss than they might have if you were to give them
But
some
when they
kind of
get
direct
hit with a
investment.
$15,000 property tax bill in year 6, they're definitely gonna feel a loss of something, a lot of money.
Again, Madam Chair, would be very open to a longer freeze if you're interested in that.
No. I'm not about these.
It's getting awful windy in there, open the windows.
I do not want to subject people to that kind of flip.
There's two other provisions I would just flag in S311, property transfer tax rate increase on residential properties. I think the definition is trying to focus on second homes and short-term rentals. Our concern is the definitions of mixed-use properties aren't super clear in the bill as it currently stands. So if you were to purchase a property that you use as a primary residence in one of the units, and then you have the other 3 as short-term rentals, what rate gets applied there?
Yeah.
And then landlord certificates, I just want to say, appreciate the Senate Economic Development Committee's commitment to moving the landlord certificate data back into tax confidentiality statute. I would just ask for thoughtful consideration about what fields we add to that. I think that can have an impact on compliance rates. I think there's one field that was added in the Economic Development Committee for rents from all units, which I think is a step back from one of the big wins that we gained a few years ago during the renter credit reform. And I just want to generally say too, like, we're happy to be a part of the discussion at the tax department, but I just want to flag, we're not a great department to run the data that might function as like a pseudo rental registry, because there are going to be stakeholders that are really interested in that data, where we're interested in the landlord certificates to provide renter credits. And so you're never going to get perfect compliance. And I don't think anyone wants us to divert compliance resources away from collecting taxes to collect certificates for people who don't need renter credits. Again, we get certificates with a relatively high compliance rate, and I'm happy to be part of that discussion. I just want to be thoughtful about, there's always going to be a gap there, and it's going to be really hard to close. I appreciate giving me a little extra time and
Okay,
happy to
thank
come
you.
back.
We will have you back. I want to get to Ellen, who has to leave in 15 minutes, maybe. You have to leave now?
No, I mean, 17 minutes.
17 minutes? Okay, 15. This should be short. This is 2:36. And we seem to have some divergence over what is actually happening. There's part 1 and part 2. Part 1 says that the aesthetic criteria is removed. Now, we've had representatives from the industry in, and they say, no, they only want it removed from individual people, not from the towns and the, the select boards and the planning commissions. But then in the second part, PUC is concerned that it does remove aesthetics as a criteria. They say that if it does that, then nobody looks at aesthetics. And we're looking for your legal opinion on that. We have not decided what we're doing on this one. only collecting enough information to get us totally confused, but I think that's the first question. What does this bill do? Does it just take out individual neighbors from being able to appeal, or does it take out aesthetics as a criteria?
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I think it is fair to be confused because the
Good.
language is odd.
Okay,
So the first part limits what adjoining neighbors are allowed to intervene on, which is directly tied to what they can then appeal on. But yes, in the second part, it strikes the word aesthetics as part of the review that the PUC will do. Now, the awkwardness there is that it leaves reference to them also giving due consideration to criterion 8 of Act 250, one of the parts of which includes aesthetics. So I think so far how that is operated is that the PUC has to make a finding on aesthetics and they consider how it is reviewed under Act 250's phrasing of that, which has led them to use, I believe, the Taquichi test, which comes from Act 250's aesthetics review criteria. So when this was, I think I raised to you that I am unsure what the intent was to do here because it strikes it initially as a criteria, but then leaves giving it due consideration.
well, that sounds like, well, we'll look at it if we feel like it.
Potentially, and so I haven't reviewed the specific case law on how due consideration has been specifically interpreted here. So I don't have a ton of information, but I do find this to be a confusing way to draft it.
Okay, yeah, because I don't think anybody wants to take aesthetics out of the review completely. Their complaint is that the pendulum is just swinging so far that neighbors are getting in, so, holding things up. On the other hand, that may be the only way for a neighbor to get a developer to go to the expense of putting up a cedar hedge along their back property line so they don't look out their window and see a solar array or block the glare from the solar array. I don't know if it was suggested or I thought of it, the public service part of it is responsible for representing the public interest, and we've been told they hire aesthetic experts. And wondering, there might be a way, we're gonna have them in, that they could follow through, they could be the spokesperson for the neighbor in a more constructive way, but I don't think we wanna prevent somebody. Businesses don't usually put up expensive cedar hedges out of the goodness of their hearts, so I think but I know, does anybody in this committee want to take the aesthetics out completely? Senator Chittenden, do you want to take the aesthetic criteria out completely? This is citing. And this, Ellen says the second part, we're back on 236.
Yeah.
The second part does remove it as a criteria. It's not what Peter Stone said they wanted.
So are you saying, do I support the bill as amended, removing the aesthetics criteria? Or the bill that proposes to remove the aesthetics criteria?
It's, right now, we don't have any amendments. It's just part one says, it's removed from the landowner, meaning the neighbor's ability, they can't appeal on criteria. But what Peter said today is they never meant to have the aesthetics criteria removed from everything. They still wanted the towns and the planning commissions and the regional planning people to be able to intervene on that criteria. Ellen says the way it is written, it would remove the criteria completely. And I wasn't getting a sense that this committee was ready to do that.
That would be concerning. And I think the testimony from the gentleman from the PUC is saying if you take it out, absolutely forecloses that off.
Yeah, and that's in the second section, it does do that. Okay, I think we're comfortable with that. I don't want to ask you to draft anything. Trying to get the public service June tiering for people in here. Tomorrow or the first day when we get back. And try and see if there's some way we can allow the neighbors to have contact with the process. So maybe through a filter. Like the public service department on their behalf. I'm looking for thoughts. Oh.
Well, I'm glad that we're not taking aesthetics out of it.
But we are, if we do what this bill says, we are preventing neighbors, that store, and we have the story about the landowners from California, Louisiana, who had vacant land and bought the solar panel thing. And yes, we all know you can drag it out till it's not cost effective for the project to go forward. But I don't know that I want to prevent you from getting to see your hedge along with that.
There is, known as a rule 11. For the lawyers breaking frivolous, it's breach of ethic, of professional
Yeah,
ethics.
these aren't professionals, these are your neighbors, this is the people
Not
next
necessarily
door.
frivolous, they were raising it, but legitimate concerns, even though they may live far away.
Well, then if it's a legitimate concern, why would we want to block it?
I mean,
The whole idea is that.
We want to do it, the only reason we want to do it is for expediency, in order to ensure that we can move these projects along and what essentially, I think, what Peter Sterling is saying is that people raise the issue, for delay purposes rather than for something, but for delay purposes, it's not necessarily frivolous. Because they just don't want it. And it results in delay, but it doesn't mean that their request is not serious.
I mean, that's the question. The question is, does their request have merit? Does it have weight or not?
We don't know.
We don't know,
So we don't know.
so why would we cut it out?
well, because it is making the production of solar panels, which are helping us meet our climate goals, which we know we're striving for. So want to make it as easy as possible to put that in. But I think we want to have consistency in our laws and rules. And I would say, yeah, there are probably, I don't know that they're doing it with, I think it's more, Goliath, David and Goliath. They're gonna fight, they're gonna fight for as long as they can, because they really don't wanna look out their window and see that.
Well, I think what the testimony that we heard was not that they're necessarily going to do it, but that it causes fear of those who are doing installing. That the likelihood of their doing or the possibility of doing discourages them from going forward with something in which if something else is there. I guess the only question that I have is whether or not there is that intermediate position. In which we add something that charges, whether it be the public service department or whoever else, with being the recipient of those complaints. To look at them and determine if they believe that the complaint has any merit, and then on behalf of or acting instead of the homeowner, that department that goes ahead now. Again, I don't know if that frankly is going to be at all helpful to those people who are just concerned about the front of the suit in the first place, and if it just adds more complexity to the process.
It might probably, because the public service department now is does handle that
They
criteria,
don't have anything else to do.
right?
I mean, that's the other issue too.
Yeah.
Is there, do we just wind up creating workload for agencies that will then come to us to look for additional help?
Right.
Yeah, well then,
Okay, I'm gonna do Senator Bray and then Senator.
Well, so not a question, I think, it's simple, but I'd be interested to hear from the department about the whole thing, if we've been trying to facilitate and steer towards certain areas, I don't know what the experience has been. Based in the RPCs, doesn't sound all that encouraging.
It doesn't.
But, generally, if you said, what would you do with the bill? I would be aware that you're going to like your bottom line, like not moving.
Oh, take out aesthetics altogether,
No, not moving the bill.
or not moving the bill, okay, that is also an option. Senator,
My understanding of the environmental review proposed developments, be it under Act 250 or section 248, is that the question is not, do we like this proposal or not? Are you for the thing that's being proposed? Are you in favor of shopping centers, or in this case, solar arrays? The question is, does this proposal as designed, as presented, conform to the legal definition of public interest? The question is, it's not so much, are you for this kind of thing? We all want solar, therefore something that interferes with particular solar proposal is got to be gotten out of the way. The question is, do you want this solar arrangement as designed with this design in this place, which is a different question. And the fact that solar is good doesn't necessarily answer the question, does the design of this solar array in this place conform to the law? And you are most likely to take the trouble to really research that are the people who have a particularized interest in, and that their particularized interests are to at least get consideration. Now, what we're hearing is that you can pretty much presume they don't have a particularized interest. They're just trying to stop it, and they're just in the way, and but I don't think we have a basis for telling.
I think they have a particularized interest. It's balancing that interest with what we have declared is a state societal interest in getting off fossil fuels. And so how do we do that? If their particularized interest, and we've heard, they don't prevail. Yeah, I think we were told only the Manchester has a project we were shown in at least 25 years has been decided on aesthetics, but they slow down the process. So the question is, how can we give those concerns, without tying down the process? If you just want to stop the process, that's probably not acceptable. If what you need, or what you're gonna get in the end, is a cedar hedge that's gonna block the view, I think you need to have a way to make that need known. And I think we're looking for another way to do that.
So since we have Ellen here, I mean, I would be open to what we had circling with the more testimony for language that would allow for us, or not allow the aesthetics criteria to qualify somebody as having standing in the proceeding if it's for an area where the town plan has clearly articulated that solar panels are allowed and should be permitted. But I also want to caveat that I'm not saying I support that, because I'd really like to hear from the VLCT to hear if any towns want to take away that aesthetic criteria. But if you're looking for some direction to the legal counsel on draft language and put something in writing to consider further debate or discussion, that's where I would put
I
it.
think at this point, we decided to take out section 2, which does away with the criteria. And then we'll deal with section 1, which is it takes it away for the 248, which are the big solar. We heard from regional planning, towns are putting up, an acre or two, and they're not having any problem citing 10 solar panels. But if you want to do 200, that's, I'm sure, the most efficient way to do it, one transmission line. These are the big projects. And we probably have an interest as a state in, our whole climate action to have some of those projects. It's how do we allow them to be sited? And because the more it costs, the more it's gonna cost us to buy the electricity. And if electricity gets expensive, you'll get to where it was 10 years ago, where I couldn't sell a house with electric heat. So we need to keep the costs down, so we have an interest in getting that siting. I don't know how we do that.
I'll try to just give you a couple of pieces of information before I leave. So one, if you're gonna keep the first part about adjoining landowners, I do think you need to look at that language, because it is a little more complicated. Because it includes adjoining landowners or someone who has a claim and interest in owning or occupying property in proximity to the facility.
That's the thing they gave us, I forget where the adjoining property owner, and it was vacant land, lived down south. They had money, so they bought this thing on, I assume, property.
So sorry, but just adjoining, I think, is a clear word.
Yeah.
Proximity to the facility, I don't know what that means specifically.
Okay.
And then
Usually
also,
abutting, adjoining.
right, so that is bigger than just adjoining, but I'm not sure how large. And then it is also introducing this concept of particularized interest. I do just want to flag that is a legal standard from Act 250. It's not currently used in the 248 proceeding, so it's introducing a new legal standard for just this group of people. And so I do think it's creating a higher bar for this group of people and limiting the criteria than for other people who may live farther away. So that's an interesting concept you may want to consider.
Other people who live farther away. So if somebody from the adjoining town wanted to object because they saw the solar field on their way to work or from their favorite hiking mountain spot, they could appeal on aesthetics?
They could seek to be, yes, added as a party. They would have to make a demonstration to the PUC, but it would be under a different standard than particularized interest. So I do want to flag that. So if you want
Do
to
we
work,
have any legal solutions to how we could phrase this?
and then I do have one other piece of information before I go, which is, I don't know a ton about individual cases on how this is played out, but the legislature in, I think, 2014 or maybe a little bit earlier added some specific language specifically about mitigation and directing the PUC to adopt mitigation rules for aesthetics. And so there is a specific aesthetic mitigation rule for 248 itself. And I do think some of that came out of the lighting associated with wind turbines.
Okay.
And so I don't know a ton about this, but there is a separate rule specific to if the PUC attaches aesthetic mitigation requirements. There's a rule regarding how that operates, and the holder of the CPG needs to do follow-up and make sure that they're maintaining the aesthetics. So at some point, there were issues where this came up, and so
I remember the discussion about windmills, noise, lights, yeah.
So something to consider about narrowing, if either clarifying the language regarding adjoining landowners if you want, or if you are specifically only interested in solar. I don't know.
I would personally like to leave windmills out of this, because windmills have been so highly controversial. That I don't, and this is really the complaint is coming from the solar people. Good.
Well, Ellen's right. This would apply to, every 248 project. That is substations, transmission lines, any utility projects.
Okay, that's what I was trying to.
So if you want to say solar projects over X amount of kilowatts or something like that. And
Okay,
really narrow it. And of course, you wouldn't have to narrow it to adjoining landowners, because we know what that means, but
yeah,
for proximity, I don't know what that means. There's no
What I
legal
say.
definition of that.
yeah,
So you'd have to really be very specific, and of course, it would impact the aesthetic mitigation rule. That we have in place. Yeah,
would that, if we did that, and if we said, you give me a number. But 248. You can go.
Okay, thanks, let me know.
I don't want to get another chair angry. That we wrote this, so that 248, keep wanting to say, hey, that's not, it's two
no,
forty-eight.
that's television.
Yeah, I know it is.
Go to
That's what we usually deal with. That
Yeah.
under 248,
Yeah.
solar projects over, you give me a number, kilowatts.
Any solar project
and-
that applies under 248 is gonna necessarily be over a certain kilowatt.
Okay.
What you're saying is that over that people would not have,
No, I'm trying to form this, what would we like to say, for these big solar power projects? Which take up acres, not feet,
yeah,
and more than one. We can say that, and this is really talking about adjoining neighbors.
You could limit it to adjoining
Adjoining.
landowners.
Well, I think they want us to eliminate everybody,
It would be everybody under this,
yeah,
except for
But I-
people who are not in close proximity, which is really weird. As Ellen pointed out, that would be very odd. So I'm 5 miles away, I can intervene or try to,
yeah.
but the guy who's across the street couldn't.
Are you driving down the road every day and on the way to work and the glare off of those things? behind you and-
I've definitely encountered situations where people like that try to intervene. Yeah, sure. Happens a lot.
Okay, so we don't want to do those. I don't know that I want to let adjoining neighbors hold up the proceedings for 2 years. But I would like to give them a voice to get a cedar hedge at least, or to be able to get some mitigation. I'm gonna talk to the public service department. And, because they do the normal. Don't they talk about aesthetics, and somebody testified they hired
Well,
aesthetics.
okay, they do hire experts, however, they have limited resources. So in my experience, and I've done many hundreds of these cases. They will not go out and contract with an independent aesthetic
Okay.
analyst, of which there are a few.
Yeah.
And it costs money, so they gotta do it. They won't do that until it's an issue in the case. And
Oh,
they
okay.
even raise aesthetics, and then they'll say, okay, now we're gonna hire aesthetic expert. Hold up, we're gonna get our results back, and then we're gonna bring it to you and see if we can verify or help out the neighbor.
Okay,
Or say no to, say to the neighbor, no,
That's-
no
yeah.
aesthetic impacts, yeah.
yeah, or there may be some, but I.
There may be
okay,
some, or maybe it needs more mitigation,
Okay,
some trees or plantings.
yeah,
I'm not sure I understand where you're going with the. Deciding based on the size of the project, because I can see a very strong case being made that the bigger the project.
can I share this? I just get past the note that says Senator Cummings comes out for hedge funds.
Mark, I was making a point. No, but I would say that the bigger the project. You could say the bigger the project, the more reason there is for people to be able to intervene on aesthetics grounds. Or are you saying if it's big enough, then it's an important thing and we wanna expedite it?
You know, it depends on how the project is sited. There might just be one neighbor on the bottom corner. There might be one there and one there, or there might be, as in Manchester, a whole housing development across the street. I think what we're being asked to do, and we may say we're not willing to do it, is to say, no, you can only intervene on traffic and public health, so unless we find there are some kind of solar rays causing cancer. And generally, these things, once they're built, don't cause a lot of traffic, they just sit there. That we will be leaving people out of having that voice. What we're basically being asked to do is find a way not to let people's voice just drag out the system. They don't win on, on aesthetic terms. But
Well, I
they
mean, we
may
don't-
get some mitigation, they'll get a hedge, they'll get the lights turned down. And I'm trying to find a way to allow them to get the deserved mitigation without tying up the procedure for a year.
I think first of all, in terms of winning or not winning, there are also cases where the developer says, oh, this probably isn't gonna fly here. I better find someplace else to put it instead. That doesn't turn out as, permit's not denied, the developer decides to go someplace else. And that does happen.
Oh, yeah, that
Okay,
was the
but-
testimony today, that they look and they see a neighbor, especially maybe a home that looks like it's fairly well-to-do, has resources, and they'll say, no, we're not going here. If they're meeting, we had the other one where they were in the town designated area,
Yes.
and a neighbor kept them out. And so
You and I are both trying to legislate from speculation right now.
we are.
And we're both on shaky ground.
We
Okay, I
all
think-
are. We have the testimony from the renewable energy. So,
But the other thing, I do want to point out the frequent references to hedgerows. Screening takes care of one kind of aesthetic problem, which is blocking the view of something ugly. Another element in aesthetics is protecting something beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that's more often the issue.
and I think if we leave that criteria in, that the PUC will then be able to do that. I don't think they're gonna cite something on the top of Mount Mansfield.
I think the
Even though it's a
PUC can
long
all, I think the PUC can also be trusted or quasi judicial. I see this with the Act 250 commissions as well. That these are citizens who've been entrusted with a certain amount of fact finding and adjudicating, quasi adjudicating powers. Trust them to do their jobs and
Right.
not allow a good project to be stymied by
Right,
something that lacks merit.
and I think that's what we're doing.
This is a good discussion. I appreciate the bill. I would love to be talking more about removing the barriers to building housing in the state and
Oh, I
not
would too.
necessarily the barriers for solar panels. And then let solar panels be on those houses and, so I'm fine with what Chris, Senator Bray suggested, which is leaving this on the wall for further debate. I don't see us having to move this forward is where I'm increasingly up. I'd just love to be talking about regulatory burdens and chilling effects of potential appeals for housing projects over.
I'm inclined to agree.
Okay, so I've got two,
What they said.
3, 4, I think we're out voting.
Ooh.
Are you a 5?
I'm a 5.
Okay, I tried. Want that on the record, I tried to find compromise. Okay, that's done, we still have Kirby. With our final version of 181, or what we hope is our final version of 181, which is
I'll be right back.
PEG funding.
We wanted.
I have a property tax rate.
You can maybe just shut the conversation down.
But also, putting the two together, we might have new housing that will be solar ready. With the roofs.
But you know what?
Build solar panels wherever you want, as long as they're underneath the house.
All we have to do is put a tax on solar panels, pay for PEG, and we're done for the day. There you go.
That's not a bad idea. We're looking for something to tax.
Great collaboration.
Okay, Kirby,
We want.
we've been around this, we've had people tell us it's not fair. That we're piling taxes on, that was from a provider of a streaming service.
We
And,
third layer.
and, yeah, with the third layer of taxes, it's also been questioned, and I assume you talked to Maria about whether or not this was legal.
Mhm.
And sales tax, whether or not it was legal, so
So,
tell us what you
all
found.
right, Kirby Key, legislative council, I have some. I mean, depending on how you view this, I've got some news, got plenty of news, whether it's good or bad, it's up to you. This is a new draft, it's based off of New York. I've had conversations with Maria, in fact, I put her initials on here because she contributed greatly to this version of things. I think that this approach handles the legal concerns I had mentioned before. What it does is it's a excise tax gross receipts on streaming and satellite only. It leaves the cable alone. If you recall before, when I put cable in here, it was because I wasn't sure of the landscape there.
Yeah.
Now that we understand that the 5% franchise fee applies to cable, we're leaving that alone, leaving that in place. What this language does is bring a 5% tax proportional with that fee that exists to the other television providers. There was some input last time I was here from Senator Chittenden about how we're going to define how this is applied. In this version of things, it is video programming. It is just what you would think of as television. It doesn't go to the other things in the previous edition. I've heard back from Streamline now.
Yeah.
And as long as it's structured like this, the Streamline governing board has said that it's fine with them to have a 5% tax that uses a different return.
Sales tax, okay.
It uses it, wouldn't use the sales tax return, this uses its own return.
Okay.
And it's 5% on the company itself and not on the customer.
Okay.
Few other things just in general, the current state of things is that 5% fee is paid by cable companies and cable is subject to sales tax right now. Streaming is subject to sales tax right now, and satellite is also subject to sales tax right now. So, with this fee, not that I'm advocating for anything, but just to be clear about the landscape, doing this would mean that the tax is roughly the same across those different types of companies. And my understanding from what the committee had asked for was to make sure that our rationale stays the same and the things, and because parity is something that I heard in this committee last time. So Maria helped to form a purpose section here that has 3 findings. The findings are that the General Assembly recognizes significant growth in entertainment content that's delivered over communication networks. That it recognizes substantial public investment in those networks, and that the networks are used to provide public needs and services. And so then the purpose is establish a comprehensive statewide mechanism for requiring equitable contributions for cable television companies, satellite television providers, and television streaming providers to support public benefit programs in the communications sector. Just to let you know, later on we'll get to it, but the revenue here would be put into a fund that's used for the PEG programming, the AMOs. Because, and of course, this can be different, but the House has also been interested in this idea and had an interest in using some of this revenue to help with access for low-income people to broadband.
We have been asked to refer any special funds that we deal with, that the money goes to the general fund to be appropriated there, because they see the whole need out there, and to have something, have a dedicated fund, and they may be going up, and we're slicing all kinds of government programs. We like to put this in the mix.
The way this is structured is there's not a specific percentage or allocation like we've seen with the property transfer tax. the revenue would go to the special fund, but then each year the General Assembly would allocate it out. So whether it goes to a general fund or it goes to the general fund,
Well, can it be accessed without an appropriation by the general fund?
it would be the way the strategy for it, of course, it can be structured a different way. But it's structured so that the fund would hold that money right now.
Yeah,
And there would be two possible ways to allocate it, which would be to AMOs or to a new low income broadband program. And the General Assembly would decide each year how to
Okay,
allocate that
that-
based on need.
all right, that is not, I mean, we have to, but the appropriations committee is really struggling. I've been asked to find a way to raise some funds for them. They would like all of these special funds to be put into the general fund so that the general fund could then allocate them based on need every year. Otherwise, we're deciding that something in a special fund is more valuable than mental health services or home health services, or all of those things that are getting level funded this year. So that's what they would ask for.
I love parity. I'm assuming with the franchise fee we get from cable companies, but that doesn't go into a special fund, right? I think we should just treat it the same way.
That goes straight to the.
Straight to them.
Oh.
It has.
But that
it's a
was
fee,
a
a
special fund,
structure.
they were being asked to not add to special funds, but that if we raise money
Okay.
for a reason, to have it go through the general fund to be appropriated. We used to do a lot of special funds, but,
So the reason why we took the special fund route, because I was aware that there's not, special funds are someone's favorite right now. In the building, but we took that route, which again, we don't have to, but it was because we wanted to try to keep that system that we had for the cable. And the way that flows to be similar for this, because again, Marie and I were working on trying to stick to the rationale that exists for that and apply it to the other thing. And so that's why we did it that way. So going through the general fund might look funny, but it's not something that's mandatory. To use.
yeah, I know the trend is to not do special funds. I know that appropriations has asked us, I mean, this is, I'm looking at Ted, but I thought it's $6 to $8 million or $8 that this would raise. They only need 3 million, which means I've got $5 million sitting
That house is
somewhere.
interested in using that for broadband.
I'm sure the House was, but the appropriations committee, I mean, we've got a lot of we've got a housing bill that's probably got a couple $100 million worth of appropriations in it. It's not gonna happen. And that we're looking at a lot of funds, but I would like to have them be able to access their 3 million, but I don't know that I want to put $5 or $6 million in escrow essentially. Or I think, but I will look at the committee on that.
Is that the estimate that this might raise 5 to 6 million? Do we have?
Okay, Ed,
Tim Burnett, Joint Fiscal Office. So a more refined estimate is we're looking at $6.5 to $8.1 million from this gross receipts.
Per year.
and I'd rather,
It's gonna go.
yeah, I would rather see that go to mental health services. Or having enough judges. We can't get kids adopted because we can't get the judicial hearings through to make it happen. There's a backlog. I can have appropriations come in and tell you.
Yeah.
But it's pretty bad.
So yeah, obviously I can draft this however, so we had a placeholder in there, but I can walk through how the tax piece would work.
Yeah.
So we have definitions for, customer, for direct broadcast satellite service, which when you see PBS in this bill, it just means satellite service. Direct broadcast, satellite service provider. There's a definition of gross receipts, which has a lot of things that are not included.
Okay.
The the idea is, and the idea is to keep the gross receipts to which this tax is based to the charges for satellite service or video streaming service. And then when those things are bundled without being separately identified by the customer, that too would be part of the gross receipts. But all other types of revenue generated by these companies would not be part of what we're trying to apply the tax to. And we have definitions for video programming, video streaming services, and video streaming providers. And the way that this version works is it's similar to before. In subsection A here on page 5, it imposes an assessment on the provision, delivery, or furnishing of satellite or video streaming services by those providers. And says that the provider shall pay an assessment equal to 5% of the provider's gross receipts derived in or from the provision, delivery, or furnishing of the services to customers in the state. This next section is about the sourcing. This is based off of the New York proposal that I was working off of. The way that New York was doing the sourcing as far as to determine whether a customer is Vermont based or not, is to look at customers' place of primary use. So if you had a situation where, and I think, this happens, some family member lives in Massachusetts and has a streaming account, but then their Vermont sibling uses their account all the time. That might, under this language, that could be sourced to, that account will be sourced to Vermont, 'cause that's the primary use.
Been in hotels or motels where you can, in other states where you can click on to your streaming account.
Mm-hmm.
That's there.
So that would end up being your primary use if you're traveling probably, it's gonna probably be Vermont.
That's where it is.
And there's also some language here that, to determine that primary place. The company would have to use available information or a reasonable inquiry to discover that, and if they can't, then the sourcing could be based on the customer's billing address. But first, it would look to the primary use. Subsection C here is something that came up before. This is also from the New York proposal. It explicitly states that the companies cannot pass this tax on to the customer or bonus your bill. And they also cannot mislead the customer to think otherwise. So, because it is meant to be an assessment, and that's a difference between, as you've heard in testimony before, that's a difference from what is allowed for the cable fee. That is something that,
Maybe past them.
yes. But this as drafted would forbid that.
They'll just up the price of the movie. They'll up their prices, you can't stop them from doing that, they can't put a separate charge on, but it will eventually go to the customer.
Here's if they raise the prices.
They could raise their prices, but the question becomes, would they raise their prices just for Vermont? Would they absorb it? Would they raise their prices across the board? Probably not for
Never know.
the few million that Ted was talking about, probably not gonna raise the price across the board, I would think.
Not against that language, I'm just curious, what inspired it? Why are we proposing to do that for these, when I think I heard you say cable companies are allowed to do that?
It's from the New York proposal, and it was something that was told to me from some members in the House that they were interested in possibly doing. There is some precedent in it for it in Vermont. We've done that with other taxes before.
Otherwise, you're just taxing your fees.
Still
So just put a
indirect.
5% tax, fee on the bottom of your bill. Like phone companies.
But I would say that the main policy reason for doing that in general would be because this is meant to be a tax on this company, and so allowing them to pass it on to the customer directly like that. For all, that would mean that the public believes that this is a tax on them. So that's not being effective.
It's an indirect step in, so.
tax from them, they won't see it until the company puts it in the bill.
Which is, you know,
It will, yeah, it'll get
How
passed.
fair that is, but.
same thing for your corporate income tax also could get passed on.
Yeah. We'll get it.
So, the process, for paying, collecting involves, the assessment being based off of, being paid once a year on April 15th for the previous calendar year. The, Department of Taxes will develop a return for this. The Department of Taxes would have the ability to audit and to go back 3 years to look at returns audit. The department also is given the ability to take a look at the records of a company that is not paying.
Okay.
You know, for the purpose possibly of discovering if they should.
Okay.
So a few questions, I'm wondering if this is great, it's moving in the right direction, that we gave you charge of, but bundled services like Amazon, interactive game subscription services, will they not get caught up in this? And also just to confirm, terrestrial broadcast service providers like WCAX, they would qualify on this, right? Because they're not charging for those services, they're just blasting it out there for people to pick up.
Yeah, it's hard as hay for.
So the satellite service is defined as, so direct broadcast satellite service means the distribution or broadcasting by satellite of video, programming or services directly to receiving equipment located at an end user's customer's premises. So it sounds like that's not going to be the broadcast you're talking about, including the provision of premium channels, provision of music or other audio services or channels, and any other service received in connection with the provision of the broadcast.
That satellite tax new, that wasn't in the original bill, was it?
The first thing that I showed,
Yeah.
no, satellite wasn't there. The reason why, two reasons primarily why satellite's in this. One, is because that's what New York's doing. And I was based off of New York.
We've tried this before. I
Mhm.
don't know if I'm happy or unhappy that I think I want to give them a chance to respond.
Sure, and it was discussed in the committee last time. That's another reason why I
Okay.
included it. And the third reason for including it is just for the parity for all of the television services.
That makes sense.
So that's satellite, and our definition for streaming is much less broad than the Massachusetts definition we were looking at before. The video streaming service means the distribution or broadcasting of video programming displayed by the viewer for a fee on a subscription basis. The term video streaming service, unless expressly provided otherwise, does not include cable service. There's also a limit, by the way, I didn't mention this before, but you're not considered a provider subject to this tax under this language if the revenue from Vermont is less than 250,000 a year.
Okay.
And that was because I think that there are some very small scale streaming that goes on, and that's not the intended tax base as far as what I believe that they can be covered. So moving on with the provisions of the tax part. There's provisions about late payments or failures to pay and a penalty. This was taken from New York, but I flagged that the tax title already has interest and penalties for all late taxes already taken care of. So we don't need to use the New York penalty. The New York penalty is a bit more severe than what we're having for most Vermont taxes.
Okay.
And then this is the auditing part I mentioned before. And that's it for the tax. The other, one thing, I did reach out to the Department of Taxes, and I just heard today that they pointed out to me in response to this that because it's a new tax that would be added to their system,
Yeah.
the vendor charges between 1 and 1.2 million for adding new taxes to their system. So that's
Okay,
the
so
allocation that they
the
would owe
first year,
taxes.
we allocate.
Good business if you can
Um,
get it.
I would like, instead of the communications public benefit fund, we can leave the satellite, the cable franchise fee in there. But I would like to dedicate any funds to the general fund. They'll go to the general fund for the purpose of funding public access television. And this year to pay any fees necessary for the tax department to implement this. I don't know if that would work time wise. They'd have to collect the tax.
I would probably just maybe just do an allocation in a separate session law section within the bill. Do you know what I mean? Not
Okay,
necessarily tie it
from
to-
the money we're collecting here, I'm
Well-
not touching anything in the general.
I'm not sure of the timing either, and I could work with JFO about that timing, but the simplest thing would be to give the allocation from the general fund. And then just know that it's going to get paid back from the revenue here.
Okay.
But we might be able to work out something more specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever you think would work. I'm just trying to give some flexibility across the hall. What we give, we can always take away. Is that okay with the committee if we do that for this year?
Sure.
Okay. This is going through the other body. I'm gonna put this on for vote tomorrow. Tomorrow? No?
I have a clarifying question.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I get do you want to limit all of the revenue to the AMOs or just have the General Assembly decide on a yearly basis?
I want the General Assembly to decide on a yearly basis.
I mean, the leftover stays in the.
Yeah, the leftovers, that they'll decide on, they'll make their budget clean just like everybody else does. They'll get their appropriation and then the money can go elsewhere.
I heard you say to vote tomorrow. I'm not against that. I'm just wondering if we have the week after, or we come back to town meeting day, that would be more time for testimony, just in
Okay.
case we're not seeing anything.
I'm assuming that the cable TV, not the cable, the satellite will definitely be in here. I'm thinking a lot of this might be in the, or watching. Yeah, but tomorrow we've got to give them very much time, so we can wait until we get out.
Unless you saw another reason. I don't know if there's a
No.
deadline. Okay.
Well, I'd love to get it out of here before they.
We did tomorrow, we can go up on notice so we can back.
And we want to check things.
Yeah, we always try and get everyone in. That means we have S-236.
One more question.
Okay,
Is this a committee amendment or is this an amendment to S-181?
this
Is
is
this
an
meant
amendment
to,
to 181.
so it's meant to replace
Yes,
that?
it's a strike law amendment.
Okay.
Yes. If we amend it after we vote it out, then we can't do committee amendments anymore. Whoever gets reported will report the amendment on behalf of it. Needed. Any other questions? I think that's it. I guess we've decided to put 236 in the wall. So we have to get housing and 181 out of here, what do we get back? Actually, we have another week to do housing. No, if you give it to us by crossover, we will have one.
Well, this goes, there's,
It's not controversial.
there's a sort of a stunning black of disinformation flowing around the plan for the overall life path for that built development. I mean, since November, speaking with leadership, that the Cleveland House, I've heard without fail, that the House will send us the Act 250 bill, come over and re-11, re-elect, and the House will meet. The House bill will travel, and the Senate will lay on the House bill. Its proposal for the housing. So that,
All going on the housing bill?
it's, will be, again, the way it's been described to me every time. So that it will, the Act 50 bill comes over.
Yeah.
We have an Act 50 bill, we have House. They're from 308, 311. They will amend the House bill. And the House bill will take housing and Act 50
All
with
at
floor
once,
and back.
as long as our tax sections stay.
So it's not a. It's,
It's not an end game.
no, it's been, this was every conversation since November. There are people that keep speculating that something else is happening. We
Well,
had,
I haven't heard anything about this.
yeah.
Have you heard anything?
No,
We don't,
we're not, not.
we are just cogs in the wheel.
Well, so even, but that's the product of all the meetings.
No, we need to go live since, offline.